Imagine being a nomad out in the ancient Near East. I mean, you don't have walled cities to protect you. You don't have like a massive standing army.
Right.
You don't even have a permanent piece of land to call your own. You basically survive by moving.
Yeah.
You're navigating through these unforgiving deserts, hostile territories, and the shifting borders of violent empires.
It was an incredibly vulnerable way to live.
It really was. And by all historical logic, a tiny group of tent dwellers like this, they should just be swallowed up by history. They should be entirely forgotten.
Yeah, completely erased.
Yet somehow, one specific group of these nomads managed to embed themselves right into the very center of the greatest events of biblical history.
They really did?
They are called the Kenites. And today we're going to look closely at who they were, how they survived, and, the really profound theological lessons they left behind.
It's such a rich topic.
We are drawing our insights today from this rich, pastoral, and deeply researched biblical study by Brother Woody Brome, which explores the Kenites' unique relationship with Israel. And I'm sitting here as a fellow learner, ready to ask the earnest questions for you, the listener. And guiding us through the deep waters of the scriptural text is our resident Bible teacher.
Well, it is a profound joy to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
Me too.
Our goal today is not to rush. The scriptures, they aren't meant to be skimmed like a newsfeed. They're meant to be inhabited.
I love that phrase, inhabited.
Yeah, we want to carefully, respectfully, and thoughtfully explore what this study brings to light, because the Bible is this vast, meticulously interconnected tapestry.
Right.
And if we only stare at the center of the tapestry, like the major patriarchs, the kings, the great prophets, we often miss the extraordinary, deliberate details woven into the margins.
And the Kenites are definitely one of those vital details on the margins.
Exactly. They offer us this stunning lens on grace, on the beauty of obedience, and really on the quiet sovereignty of God moving behind the scenes of history.
That idea of people on the margins is exactly what hooked me when I was preparing for this deep dive. They move in and out of the biblical narrative, almost like, a caravan on the horizon.
That's a great image.
Because the covenant nation of Israel is undoubtedly the center of the biblical story, but the Kenites are just constantly there. They're hovering right in the periphery, catching the overflow of God's grand purposes.
They're always adjacent to the action.
Yeah, and their trajectory is staggering. I mean, we're talking about a people who span hundreds of years of biblical history. We'll see them counseling Moses in the absolute desolation of the wilderness.
Right.
Centuries later, we'll see a single Kenite woman commit this shocking, visceral act of warfare that literally changes the fate of God's people.
It's one of the most dramatic moments in the Old Testament.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then generations after that, we'll see a family of them, still living in tents right in the middle of a corrupt city, receiving a direct commendation from God himself.
It's an amazing arc.
But I feel like to really grasp how they pulled this off, we have to understand their everyday reality. So let's start with the land and the lifestyle. Who were they and how do they actually survive out there?
Well, to truly understand the Kenites, you have to sort of feel the harshness of the landscape they inhabited.
Okay.
Scripture portrays them as a fiercely mobile, tent-dwelling people. They moved primarily through the dry, arid southlands, the regions near the Negev, and the vast wilderness stretches that bridge Judah and Midian.
And the Negev is not an easy place to live.
Not at all. If you've never been to the Negev, you have to picture a place of just absolute extremes. It is cracked, sun-baked earth. There are these deep ravines called wadis that are bone dry most of the year.
Right, but they flood, don't they?
Yes, exactly. They can turn into deadly flash floods in a sudden rain. The vegetation is sparse. Surviving there isn't just about endurance. It requires a highly sophisticated rhythm of life.
You really have to know what you're doing.
You do. The book of Judges actually mentions the descendants of Moses' father-in-law moving up from the city of Palms to live among the people of the desert of Judah in the Negev near Arad. They didn't build stone houses, they didn't settle in walled cities.
Which means they didn't have the typical defenses that ancient civilizations relied on, like thick walls and gates.
Exactly. Their defense was their mobility. Their entire life was defined by the seasons. They lived in these large tents, typically woven from dark goat hair.
Goat hair.
Yeah, which is fascinating in itself because goat hair expands when it gets wet, making the tents naturally waterproof.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
And then the loose weave actually allows the intense desert heat to escape during the day.
That is brilliant engineering for a nomadic people.
It really is. But they had to know exactly when to pitch these tents, where the seasonal grazing for their herds would be, how to locate hidden subterranean water sources.
Because if you miss the water, you die. It's that simple.
Precisely. And they had to know exactly when it was time to pack up and relocate. It was a rugged, entirely exposed existence, but, and this is key, it was also a deeply intentional choice.
How so?
Well, settling in a city in the ancient Near East meant you were subject to the local king. You were heavily taxed, and your sons were conscripted into his wars.
Oh, I see. So the Kenites basically chose the hardship of the desert because it guaranteed their freedom.
Exactly right. They traded physical comfort for absolute autonomy.
It makes total sense.
Huh.
But that nomadic lifestyle inevitably places them at the crossroads of everyone else's business.
Oh, definitely.
Because they are moving along ancient trade routes to survive, which means they are constantly brushing up against regional trade and regional conflict.
Right, they couldn't just isolate themselves completely.
Right, so they know Israel intimately, they share history with them, but they aren't bound by Israel's laws.
Mm.
The analogy that comes to my mind is modern independent contractors.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, or like highly skilled tradespeople who travel from community to community. They provide essential services, they form strong relationships, they are vital to the ecosystem of the towns they pass through. But at the end of the day, they aren't citizens of that town.
That's right.
They maintain their own corporate identity, their own freedom, and they aren't bound by the city charter. They are intertwined with the settled people, yet fiercely independent.
That is a perfect conceptualization. They were woven into the regional fabric without being trapped by it. And your mention of skilled tradespeople actually brings us to one of the most fascinating historical and linguistic details about the Kenites.
Oh, really? What's that?
Well, the Hebrew root word behind the name Kenite, which is quain, is deeply linked to the concept of metalworking. Yes, it sounds very much like the Hebrew word for a smith, specifically like a metalsmith, a blacksmith, or a coppersmith.
Wait, really? The biblical text doesn't say that outright, does it?
No, the biblical text doesn't pause to explicitly state, by the way, the Kenites were all metalworkers. But the linguistic connection, combined with their geographic movements, has led scholars to firmly conclude that specialized metalwork was their primary trade.
But wait, how does a nomadic tribe run a metalworking operation?
It's hard to picture, right?
Yeah, I mean, I always picture blacksmiths needing massive, permanent stone forges and anvils.
And that's the absolute brilliance of it. We know from archaeological discoveries in the region, especially down in the Araba Valley, which is rich in copper, that ancient nomadic smiths developed highly efficient portable forges.
Portable forges? How does that even work?
They would dig a trench, line it with stones, use animal skin bellows to pump oxygen into the fire, and use charcoal to reach the incredibly high temperatures needed to smelt copper or work iron.
So they essentially carried their foundries on the backs of their pack animals.
Exactly.
That is incredible resourcefulness. But why was this specific skill so crucial to their survival out in the ancient Near East?
Well, think about the era we are dealing with. We are talking about the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. Metal is the absolute bedrock of the economy and of military power.
Because it's the cutting-edge technology of the day.
Literally cutting edge. If you are a settled agricultural people, you desperately need metal tools like plowshares, pruning hooks, sickles. And if you are a king, you desperately need metal weapons.
Right. Swords, spearheads, chariot fittings.
Yes. 1 Samuel 13 gives us a vivid picture of this dynamic. It describes a time when the Philistines held a monopoly on metalworking, and the Israelites had to go down to the Philistines just to get their farm tools sharpened.
And I imagine they were charged exorbitant prices.
They absolutely were.
Because if you control the metal, you control the food supply and the military.
Precisely. So if the Kenites possess these rare, highly technical skills, it explains their entire socio-political reality. It explains how they could move lightly through the land without being slaughtered by larger empires.
Oh, I see. A Canaanite king is not going to send his army to massacre a nomadic camp if those nomads are the only ones who know how to repair the axles on his iron chariots.
Exactly. Their trade granted them a kind of diplomatic immunity. It guaranteed them safe passage and welcome among various, sometimes warring, neighboring groups. They were useful to everyone and a threat to no one.
Okay, so they have this rugged adaptability, they have a highly coveted trade that gives them diplomatic immunity, and they have the freedom of the desert. Now let's trace their specific connection to Israel.
Let's do it.
Because how did these independent metalsmiths end up woven into the story of the Exodus?
We have to
Go back to Moses, right?
Yes, we step back into the second chapter of Exodus. Moses has just made a catastrophic, life-altering decision.
He kills the Egyptian.
Right. He is an adopted prince of Egypt, but he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and in a burst of righteous but misplaced anger, Moses strikes the Egyptian down and kills him.
And then he has to run.
Yes. When the murder is discovered, Pharaoh seeks to kill him, and Moses flees for his life. He runs eastward, out of the lush, highly structured civilization of the Nile Delta, and he arrives in the harsh, unstructured wilderness of Midian.
The culture shock must have been absolute. He goes from palaces and central authority to sand and nomadic tribes.
Exactly. And exhausted, he sits down by a well. Now, the well in ancient Near Eastern culture is the absolute center of nomadic life.
It's a water cooler.
It's the watering hole, the news station, the place of social gathering, all rolled into one. While he's there, the 7 daughters of a man named Reuel, who is also known as Jethro, come to water their father's flocks.
And trouble finds him again.
It does. Some aggressive, rival shepherds show up and try to drive the women away to take the water for themselves. Moses, who clearly still has that protective, justice-oriented fire in him, stands up, fights off the rival shepherds, and waters the women's flocks himself.
Which is such a beautiful echo of what he tried to do in Egypt. But this time he does it without murder.
Right. A much more redemptive use of his protective instincts.
And this is where the connection begins. Who is this man? Jethro.
Jethro is introduced to us with a very specific title. The text calls him a priest of Midian. The Midianites and the Kenites are deeply intertwined. The terms are sometimes used fluidly in Scripture, suggesting the Kenites were a specific clan or guild within the larger Midianite tribal structure.
Okay, that makes sense.
So Jethro hears what Moses did, and he actually chides his daughters for leaving the Egyptian stranger at the well. He invites Moses in, offers him hospitality, and eventually gives his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage.
Wow, so Moses marries into the Kenite family.
He does. They have a son, and Moses names him Gershom, which sounds like the Hebrew for a foreigner there. Moses says, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." And Moses stays there. He spends the next 40 years shepherding the flocks of his Kenite, Midianite father-in-law.
40 years. I think we often gloss over that time frame.
We really do.
Like we read Exodus, and it's just a quick page turn between Moses fleeing Egypt and Moses at the burning bush. But 40 years is an entire lifetime.
Yes, it is a massive chunk of his life.
It's a complete reprogramming of his identity. He's learning the survival rhythms of the desert from this specific Kenite family.
It is a profound season of retraining. God is basically taking the Egyptian prince out of Moses and replacing him with a desert shepherd.
Which is exactly what he's going to need.
Right. Moses learns where the water is, how to survive the harsh seasons, how to lead stubborn flocks, all of which is direct preparation for leading a stubborn nation through that exact same wilderness.
That is so true.
And this 40-year period lays an unbreakable foundation of relational trust between Moses and the Kenites.
Which becomes explicitly clear later on. If we fast forward, past the plagues, past the parting of the Red Sea, Israel is out in the wilderness heading toward Sinai.
Right.
And Moses leans heavily on those Kenite family ties. In Numbers chapter 10, Moses extends a really fascinating invitation to a man named Hobab. Who is Hobab, and what is Moses asking him to do?
Hobab is the son of Reuel, making him Moses' brother-in-law.
Okay.
The Israelites are about to break camp and head deeper into the uncharted wilderness toward the Promised Land. Moses goes to Hobab and essentially pleads with him to come along. He says, "Please do not leave us. You know where we should camp in the wilderness, and you can be our eyes."
You can be our eyes. I really love that phrasing. But what does that actually mean in a practical sense?
Right.
Because God is leading them with a pillar of cloud and fire, right? So why do they need Hobab?
That is a great question. It's a wonderful intersection of divine guidance and human practical wisdom.
How so?
Well, the pillar of cloud might show them the general direction to travel and when to stop, but the Hobab knows the microgeography.
I see.
He knows which wadi has a hidden spring that can sustain 1 million people. He knows which neighboring tribes are hostile and which are friendly. He knows where the deadly vipers nest and where the grazing is safe.
So the cloud is the macro, but Hobab is the micro.
Exactly. Moses is saying, God is leading us, but we need your localized expertise to survive the daily mechanics of this journey. And Moses promises him, whatever good the Lord does for us, we will do for you.
And that invitation fundamentally shifts the geography of the Kenite people, doesn't it?
It does, permanently.
They don't just stay in Midian anymore. Because of Hobab's decision to journey with Israel, the Kenites developed this incredibly fluid geographical footprint. As the biblical narrative unfolds, we see that some of them eventually cross into the Promised Land with Israel and settle down in the south, near the city of Arad, right alongside the tribe of Judah.
Yes, they integrate deeply with Judah in the southern deserts. But not all of them. The fluidity of their nomadic lifestyle means they aren't bound to one spot. The text tells us that one specific man, Heber the Kenite, takes his household and pitches his tent far to the north, near a place called Kadesh in the territory of Naphtali.
Which seems like a minor geographic footnote at the time.
It really does.
Until you realize that God is essentially pre-positioning these tents on the chessboard of history. Every movement is setting the stage for what is to come.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into the actual biblical narrative, starting with the early days of Moses in the wilderness. There's a massive moment in Exodus chapter 18.
One of my favorite chapters.
Yeah, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, hears about the Exodus and comes out to visit the Israelite camp. What happens when this Midianite priest walks into the camp of Yahweh?
It is one of the most breathtaking theological moments in the early Old Testament. Jethro arrives, bringing Moses' wife and sons to him. Moses greets his father-in-law, bows down, kisses him, and brings him into his tent.
A lot of respect there.
Deep respect. Then, Moses recounts everything. He tells Jethro about the plagues, what the Lord did to Pharaoh, the crossing of the Red Sea, the hardships they faced, and how Yahweh delivered them at every turn.
And Jethro's response is completely countercultural for an ancient pagan priest, isn't it?
Completely. In the ancient world, deities were strictly territorial. If you were a Midianite, you worshipped the gods of Midian. To acknowledge another nation's god as supreme was unthinkable.
Right, it would be almost treasonous in a spiritual sense.
Exactly. But Jethro listens to this undeniable record of historical salvation, and his heart just responds. He rejoices and breaks out into a great declaration of faith.
What does he say?
He says, "Praise be to the Lord who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods."
Wow.
He then brings a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God, and Aaron and all the elders of Israel come to eat bread with him in the presence of God. It is a beautiful, vivid picture of a man from the margins, outside the covenant bloodline, being drawn into a deep, reverent awe of Israel's God.
It's beautiful. But the beauty of Jethro is that his theology immediately translates into practical structural wisdom.
Yes, it doesn't stay in the clouds.
Right, because the very next day, after this incredible worship service, Jethro observes how the camp is actually running. And I want to linger on this because the mechanics of it are fascinating and incredibly relatable for anyone in leadership who has ever flirted with burnout.
Oh, highly relatable.
Set the scene for us. What does Jethro actually see Moses doing?
Jethro watches his son-in-law go to work. The text says Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening.
A long day.
Now visualize this. You have well over 1 million people, recently emancipated from brutal slavery. They have no established legal code yet, no civic infrastructure, no police force. They are living in high-stress survival conditions in a desert.
So the interpersonal friction must have been astronomical.
Exactly. Disputes over property, accusations of theft, arguments over water rights, marital strife. Literally every single issue was being brought directly to Moses.
Oh my goodness.
Moses is functioning as the sole arbiter of justice for an entire nation. He is bearing the entire cognitive and emotional weight of their trauma and conflict.
And he's just one guy.
Right. Jethro watches this line of people stretching on for hours, and he sees the inevitable collapse. He pulls Moses aside and basically says, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone."
Which is such an insightful diagnosis. Because he realizes it isn't just Moses who is suffering, the people are suffering too.
Yeah.
Justice delayed is justice denied. Standing in the desert sun for 10 hours to resolve a dispute over a stolen goat is a terrible system.
It's totally unsustainable.
So Jethro lays out an alternative. How does his proposed system work?
Jethro proposes a decentralized appellate court system, which, frankly, is brilliant.
Yeah.
He tells Moses to stop trying to be the single point of failure. Instead, Moses should represent the people before God and teach them the decrees and laws. Then, for the day-to-day governance, Moses is to select capable men from all the people, and specifically men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain.
Notice the character requirements there. It isn't the wealthiest men or the strongest warriors. It's men of integrity.
Exactly. Character over competence. And Jethro says to appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens.
Break that down for me. How does a system of tens and thousands actually alleviate the burden on Moses?
Think of it like a tribal pyramid structure. A head of 10 is essentially a respected elder over a few extended families. If two neighbors have a minor dispute, they go to the head of 10. It's intimate, it's immediate, and it's handled locally.
Oh, I see.
If the head of 10 can't resolve it, it goes to the head of 50, then the head of 100, then the head of 1,000. Only the most complex, unprecedented, or severe cases make their way up to the Supreme Court, which is Moses.
That is amazing.
Jethro says, have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you.
Okay, I have to pause here. I'm just struck by the profound humility required by Moses to accept this.
It's remarkable.
Because Moses is the man who stood barefoot before the burning bush. Moses is the man who raised his staff to part the Red Sea. He has a resume of divine encounters that no human being in history can match.
Right. He literally speaks with God face to face.
Exactly. If anyone had the right to pull rank, to say, God speaks directly to me, I don't need your secular management advice, it was Moses. Yet when his Midianite tent-dwelling father-in-law says, your system is broken, here is a better way, Moses actually listens. He completely overhauls the legal architecture of Israel based on the advice of a foreigner.
It is one of the greatest examples of leadership humility in the entire Bible. Moses understood that divine calling does not negate the need for human wisdom and practical organization.
That's a great way to put it.
And it establishes a vital pattern for us. The Kenites bring a stabilizing, life-saving wisdom to Israel when Israel is most vulnerable. God's truth and God's structural wisdom are not confined to the covenant people. God can speak administrative salvation through a Midianite just as easily as he can speak theological truth through a burning bush.
And that vulnerability certainly returns in a massive way when we move into the era of the Judges.
Yes, it gets very intense.
We are fast-forwarding chronologically now. The Israelites are in the Promised Land. Moses and Joshua have long since passed away. But it is a dark, chaotic time. The book of Judges is essentially a cycle of Israel's rebellion, oppression, and deliverance.
It's a dark spiral.
Set the stage for us in Judges chapters 4 and 5. What is the geopolitical situation for the Israelites?
It is a desperate situation. The Israelites in the north are being brutally oppressed by a Canaanite king named Jabin, who rules from Hazor. And the real terror of Jabin's regime is his military commander, a man named Sisera.
Yes.
Sisera commands 900 iron chariots.
Iron chariots. There's the metalworking connection again. This is advanced, unstoppable military technology for the time.
It really is. It is the ancient equivalent of a fleet of tanks facing off against a militia with pitchforks. For 20 years, Sisera has cruelly oppressed the Israelites. Finally, God raises up a prophetess named Deborah and a military leader named Barak.
And they go to war.
Yes. And through divine intervention, specifically a sudden massive rainstorm that turns the battlefield into a mud pit, Sisera's iron chariots are completely immobilized. The Israelite infantry sweeps in and the Canaanite army is entirely routed.
So the tanks get stuck in the mud.
Exactly. Sisera, the formidable, terrifying commander, realizes the battle is lost. He abandons his chariot and flees on foot. He's exhausted, desperate, and running for his life.
And where does the commander of the Canaanite army run to hide?
He runs directly to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite.
Wait, Heber the Kenite, the one who moved up north.
Exactly. Remember Heber. He was the Kenite who moved his family far to the north, away from the rest of his tribe, and settled near Kadesh.
Pre-positioned on the chessboard.
Exactly. And the text adds a crucial detail. Sisera chose this specific tent because there was a treaty of peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. Sisera firmly believes he has found a neutral, safe ground.
Because of the hospitality laws back then, right?
Yes. In the ancient Near East, the law of hospitality was absolute and sacred. If you crossed the threshold of someone's tent and were offered food or drink, the host was honor-bound, even to the point of death, to protect you. Sisera is banking on this cultural law.
So Sisera arrives, bleeding, exhausted, looking for sanctuary. Walk us through the mechanics of what happens next, because it is a shocking, decisive moment.
Well, Jael goes out to meet him, and she projects total calm and welcome. She says, "Come, my lord, come right in, don't be afraid." She brings him into her tent.
So she's leaning into the hospitality role.
Very much so. Sisera is parched, and he asks for a little water. Jael goes above and beyond to make him feel secure. She doesn't just give him water. She opens a skin of milk. Deborah's song in chapter 5 later describes this poetically, saying she brought him curdled milk in a bowl fit for nobles.
Wow, she's really rolling out the red carpet.
She is offering supreme hospitality. She gives him the milk, covers him with a heavy blanket, and stands guard at the door. Sisera, feeling completely safe, his belly full of heavy milk and utterly exhausted from the terror of the battle, falls into a deep, heavy sleep.
I have to admit, I struggle with what happens next. It is incredibly jarring.
It is.
It feels like a total betrayal of trust. What does she do?
It is intensely visceral. While the mighty warrior sleeps, Jael silently takes a tent peg in her left hand and a heavy workman's hammer in her right. Now you have to remember who she is. Pitching and striking the heavy goat hair tents was exclusively the work of women in nomadic tribes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. Driving a wooden or bone peg through hard, stony desert soil was an action she had performed thousands of times. She possessed immense upper body strength and perfect aim.
So she knows exactly how to wield that hammer.
She does. She creeps quietly over to him, places the point of the peg against his temple, and with one massive swing of the hammer, she drives the peg completely through his skull and down into the ground. As the text bluntly, chillingly states, and he died.
Wow. It's just a staggering reversal of expectations. I mean, a tyrant who oppressed a nation with iron chariots and sophisticated weaponry is defeated not on the battlefield by a male warrior, but in a domestic tent by a nomadic woman using household tools.
It's an incredible irony.
But I really want to process this out loud, because as a modern reader, it's hard to read this without feeling a sense of moral whiplash.
I completely understand.
Like, she lied to him. She broke the sacred law of hospitality. It feels like cold-blooded assassination, you know? How do we reconcile this with the biblical narrative without twisting ourselves into knots trying to justify it?
That is a very honest and necessary struggle. And we cannot sanitize the brutality of the ancient world. We have to read Jael's story through the lens of redemptive historical context.
Okay. Unpack that for me.
Well, Sisera was not an innocent refugee. He was a violent, cruel oppressor who had terrorized God's people for 2 decades. Jael is placed in an impossible moral dilemma. If she protects Sisera, she becomes complicit in his tyranny and an enemy of Yahweh. If she turns him over, she violates the treaty her husband made.
So she's stuck.
She chooses to align herself decisively and violently with the oppressed people of God rather than honor a political treaty with a tyrant. Furthermore, this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was the exact fulfillment of prophecy.
Right. Deborah had prophesied this earlier to Barak, right?
Yes. Barak had hesitated to go into battle without Deborah, and Deborah told him, "Because of the way you're going about this, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman."
It was Jael.
God used the absolute most unexpected, marginalized instrument, a non-Israelite nomadic woman using a camping tool, to deliver his people and execute divine justice. This is why Deborah's song in Judges 5 erupts in ecstatic praise for Jael.
What does she sing?
She sings, "Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of tent-dwelling women." The theological reality is that God's justice against arrogance was executed perfectly through her. The Kenite presence became the very anvil of God's deliverance.
It's a heavy, weighty reality, but it shows the absolute lengths God will go to preserve his people. And the story of the Kenites' loyalty doesn't end there, does it?
No, it continues to echo.
We've seen them in the wilderness with Moses. We've seen them in the era of the judges with Jael. Now, the study moves us chronologically forward again, deep into the era of the kings and prophets. Let's look at King Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 15.
A very interesting moment.
Saul is preparing to go to war against a fiercely hostile nomadic group called the Amalekites. But right before the battle, Saul sends a very specific message to the Kenites who are living near the Amalekites. What does he tell them?
Saul issues a direct warning. He says to the Kenites, "Go away, leave the Amalekites so that I do not destroy you along with them, for you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt." Saul urges them to pack their tents and move, specifically citing the hospitality and assistance that Jethro and Hobab provided hundreds of years prior.
Think about the timeline there. From the Exodus to King Saul is roughly 300 to 400 years.
It's a huge gap of time.
That means Saul is sparing an entire people group based on a kindness that happened 4 centuries ago. That is an incredible canopy of generational grace.
It truly is. And the contrast between the Amalekites and the Kenites is deeply intentional here. When Israel came out of Egypt, weak and vulnerable, the Amalekites attacked them from the rear, slaughtering the stragglers.
A cowardly attack.
Very much so. But in contrast, the Kenites met them with wisdom, hospitality, and guidance. God did not forget either action. The Kenites' historic kindness became a literal shield for their descendants. We see this integration continue beautifully with King David, too.
Oh, with David. Where do we see that?
In 1 Samuel 30, David and his men defeat a band of Amalekite raiders and recover a massive amount of plunder. David, instead of keeping it all, sends gifts to the elders of Judah, and he specifically includes those in the towns of the Kenites.
It just shows how deeply woven they were into the fabric of Judah. They weren't just tolerated outsiders. They were trusted allies, considered friends in the darkest, most difficult times of David's exile.
They were family, practically.
But I want to move us to what I think is the absolute crescendo of the Kenite narrative. The study highlights a moment in Jeremiah chapter 35 involving a specific Kenite clan called the Rechabites.
This is such a profound passage.
It's an almost surreal encounter. Set the historical stage for us. What is the spiritual and political climate in Judah during the time of Jeremiah?
The climate in Judah is one of terminal spiritual decay and impending national doom. The Babylonian Empire is rising, threatening to crush Jerusalem. But the real problem is internal.
The idolatry.
Yes. For generations, the people of Judah have ignored God's prophets. They are deeply syncretic, meaning they are worshiping Yahweh in the temple, but also worshiping Canaanite fertility gods on the high places. They are compromising, comfortable, and utterly blind to the judgment that is right at their gates.
And into this toxic, settled urban environment, God brings the Rechabites. Who exactly are the Rechabites, and how do they fit into the Kenite family tree?
The Rechabites are a specific, highly disciplined clan of Kenites descended from a man named Jehonadab. If you look back at 2 Kings 10, Jehonadab was a zealous man who actually rode in the chariot with King Jehu to violently purge Baal worship out of the northern kingdom of Israel.
Oh, wow. So he was very serious about holiness.
Extremely. Jehonadab was deeply concerned with purity. He realized that the settled agrarian lifestyle of the Canaanites and Israelites was entirely intertwined with idolatry. If you planted a vineyard, you were tempted to pray to the local fertility god for rain. If you built a permanent house, you became attached to the corrupt culture of the city.
So Jehonadab institutes a radical rule for his family to prevent that assimilation.
Yes. He commanded his descendants, you must never drink wine, you must never build houses, sow seed, or plant vineyards. You must never have any of these things, but must always live in tents.
That is intense.
He essentially mandates that they maintain their austere, nomadic, wilderness identity forever as a safeguard against the spiritual rot of settled civilization. And remarkably, for roughly 250 years, the family obeys. They don't touch alcohol, they don't farm, they only live in tents.
Which is an extreme countercultural asceticism.
Mm-hmm.
But during Jeremiah's time, because the Babylonian army is invading the countryside, the Rechabites have temporarily sought refuge inside the walled city of Jerusalem.
Right, they had to flee the countryside.
So they're pitching their tents in the streets of the capital. And God tells Jeremiah to do something very specific with them. What is the test?
God instructs Jeremiah to bring the entire Rechabite family into one of the side rooms of the temple in Jerusalem. Jeremiah sets large bowls and cups full of wine before them, and he gives them a direct command. He says, drink some wine.
In the temple.
Yes. Now remember, this is the prophet of Yahweh telling them to do this inside the temple precinct. The pressure to conform must have been immense.
They don't budge.
Not an inch. Their response is immediate and unyielding. They say, we do not drink wine because our forefather Jehonadab, son of Rechab, gave us this command. They respectfully but firmly refuse, explaining their generational commitment to their family's role.
Now, I want to clarify something here because I think it's easy to misunderstand the point. God is not setting a biblical mandate here that all true believers must abstain from building houses, planting gardens, or drinking wine. This isn't a theology of mandatory asceticism, right?
Exactly right. That would be missing the point entirely. The issue is not the wine or the houses or the seeds. God is using the Rechabites as a living, breathing, visual sermon.
A visual sermon. I like that.
He is using them to deliver a crushing rebuke to the nation of Judah. The word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah, and God points to this nomadic family and essentially says to Judah, look at the Rechabites. They have faithfully, flawlessly obeyed the strict command of a dead human ancestor for 2.5 centuries, simply out of respect for his word.
Wow.
But I am your creator. I am the Lord your God. I have spoken to you again and again, sending my servants the prophets day after day, pleading with you to turn from your wicked ways, and you have not listened to me.
The contrast is just devastating. I mean, a human ancestor gives a difficult command about lifestyle, and his descendants obey for centuries. The living, covenant-keeping God gives a life-saving command about holiness, and his own people ignore him daily.
It exposes the absolute tragic absurdity of Judah's disobedience, and because of the Rechabites' unwavering steadfastness, God pronounces a breathtaking blessing over them.
What's the blessing?
He says, Jehonadab, son of Rechab, will never fail to have a descendant to serve me.
That gives me chills.
It's profound. In a city that is literally weeks away from being destroyed, its temple burned, and its people deported to Babylon because of their compromise, this obscure family of tent dwellers receives an eternal word of divine favor.
It is a stunning climax to their historical journey, and it perfectly transitions us to the theological weight of this entire study. The story of the Kenites isn't just fascinating ancient history. It illuminates massive anchor truths about the character of God and how he operates in the world.
It certainly does.
The first major theological point we need to anchor ourselves to is what the study calls the backbone of the covenant. And this is crucial for interpreting the Old Testament correctly, because the deep inclusion and blessing of the Kenites does not mean they replace Israel's chosen status, does it?
No, it does not. And establishing that guardrail is absolutely essential for healthy biblical theology.
Explain that for us.
Well, God made a unilateral sworn oath to Abraham to bless his offspring, to make them a great nation, and to give them the land. That covenant is the absolute backbone of the entire biblical narrative. It stands on the immovable rock of God's faithfulness, not on the shifting sands of human history, and certainly not on the moral perfection of Israel, as their history clearly shows.
Right. So where do the Kenites fit in?
The Kenites are not the covenant nation. They did not receive the law at Sinai. They did not inherit the land of promise as a tribal allotment.
But their story highlights this beautiful parallel reality. It shows us that God's sovereignty isn't restricted by borders. He gracefully interacts with neighboring peoples.
Yes, his grace spills over.
Their proximity to Israel placed them under the light of God's revelation, and God wove their choices, their obedience, and their loyalty right into his grand redemptive plan. We see God actively advancing his work through those who attach themselves to his people with sincere loyalty.
We see it time and time again. Jethro's counsel saved the legal system. Jael's courage eliminated a tyrant. The Rechabites' faithfulness served as a prophetic rebuke. God openly honors their reverence, even though they do not possess covenant membership by blood.
But help me understand the nuance here. How do we balance this beautiful inclusion of outsiders in the Old Testament with the distinct role of Israel, especially as we turn the page into the New Testament?
It is a profound transition to understand. Throughout the Old Testament, Scripture makes room for the sojourner, the foreigner, who fears the Lord and aligns with Israel. Isaiah 56 explicitly promises blessing to the foreigner who binds himself to the Lord.
Okay.
But in the Old Testament, this inclusion does not erase the distinct national covenantal boundaries of Israel. However, when we move to the New Testament, something entirely new is inaugurated by the cross and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
And the Apostle Paul unpacks this beautifully, right?
Yeah, he unpacks it brilliantly in Ephesians 2 and Romans 11. He explains that in Christ, the dividing wall of hostility has been violently broken down. The New Testament church is a new spiritual reality formed by union with Christ, where Jew and Gentile stand together as one entirely new people, sharing equally in the spiritual blessings of the new covenant.
But importantly, the study notes that this new reality of the church doesn't simply overwrite or erase God's future historic promises to ethnic Israel.
Precisely. The church is a unique reality, but Paul spends 3 entire chapters in Romans, chapters 9, 10, and 11, laboring to make clear that God has not rejected his historical people, Israel. The gifts and calling of God are irrevocable.
So how should we view the Kenites in light of all this?
When we look back at the Kenites, we shouldn't view them as replacements for Israel. Instead, we should view them as a brilliant prophetic foreshadowing.
A foreshadowing of the church.
Yes. They are an early glimmer of the radical grace that will eventually reach all the nations. They show us God's heart to gather people from the extreme margins into his purposes, while still faithfully maintaining the long arc of his specific promises to Israel.
That is incredibly helpful. It keeps the whole counsel of Scripture in perfect balance. Moving to another theological theme that really struck me, the idea that God remembers mercy.
Yes, this is a beautiful truth.
The study reflects deeply on a voice in the New Testament, Hebrews 6:10, which says, God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him as you have helped his people. When you connect that verse directly to Saul sparing the Kenites because of what Jethro did 400 years earlier, The implications are just staggering.
They really are. Think about the nature of human memory versus divine memory.
They're very different.
Extremely. In human terms, an act of kindness shown 4 centuries ago is dust. It is completely forgotten, lost to the relentless churn of history. But God is not bound by time, and his character is fundamentally just and fiercely loyal.
So when Saul spares them,
When Saul spares the Kenites, he isn't just making a polite political concession. He is operating under the divine principle that kindness shown to God's vulnerable people is considered kindness shown directly to God himself, and God simply does not forget it.
for anyone listening today, there is a profound, quiet comfort in this truth. The silent, entirely unseen acts of love you do, the support you offer to a struggling believer, the mercy you extend, the hospitality you provide, those things are never lost to history.
Never.
God has an infinitely long memory for the mercies shown in his name.
It fundamentally shifts your perspective, doesn't it? You stop craving immediate recognition or applause from people because you realize your actions are secured in the eternal memory of God.
Exactly. The final theological point the study explores is the contrast we saw in Jeremiah, the spiritual decay of Judah versus the steadfastness of the Rechabites. It vividly exposes the cost of compromise versus the beauty of true obedience. And I really appreciate how careful the study is to frame the nature of obedience here, because it makes clear that obedience isn't a mechanism to earn salvation.
That distinction is the beating heart of a healthy, orthodox spiritual life. We must never view obedience as a transaction.
Unpack that a bit more.
Well, the Rechabites didn't obey their ancestors' strict rules as a way to earn their way into the Abrahamic covenant. Their obedience was a matter of deep-seated reverence, integrity, and identity.
Right.
In stark contrast, the nation of Judah presumed upon the grace of the covenant. They looked at the temple in Jerusalem, they looked at their bloodline, and they thought, we are safe, we are the chosen ones. And they used that covenant security as a license to actively sin and compromise with the culture around them.
They treated grace as permission for idolatry.
Exactly. And the cost of that presumption was catastrophic. It ended in exile and the destruction of the very temple they trusted in. The beauty of the Rechabites is that their obedience sprang from a genuine, disciplined respect. When we look to the New Testament, Jesus perfectly summarizes the motive for Christian obedience. He says in John 14, "If you love me, keep my commands." Obedience is not the root of our salvation. It is the natural, beautiful, inevitable fruit of a heart that has been genuinely captured by the grace, majesty, and love of God.
That is so well said. Which brings us to the most crucial part of our time together, the practical application. We've explored the history of the nomads and the metal workers, we've walked through the biblical narrative of Moses and Jael, and we've unpacked the heavy theology. Now let's bring it right down to the ground.
Let's do it.
How does the story of these ancient tent dwellers intersect with the decisions you and I have to make tomorrow morning? Let's start with Jethro. The study suggests Jethro teaches us about valuing unexpected wisdom. What does that look like for the modern believer?
Jethro's interaction with Moses is a desperately needed warning against the danger of the spiritual echo chamber.
Oh, the echo chamber. That is so real.
It is very easy for believers, especially those who have walked with the Lord for decades or those in pastoral leadership, to become insulated. We start to believe that valid insight can only come from people who share our exact theological vocabulary, who read the same books, and who belong to our specific denomination.
But Jethro was a Midianite.
Exactly. Yet he possessed the exact administrative, organizational wisdom that saved the leadership of Israel from total collapse.
So the application is recognizing that all truth is God's truth, regardless of the vessel it arrives in.
Yes. Today, we must cultivate the humility to recognize and receive godly, practical wisdom, even if it comes from outside our comfortable circles.
Can you give an example of what that might look like today?
Well, perhaps a secular organizational psychologist has published research about healthy emotional boundaries that your church staff desperately needs to implement to survive. Or perhaps a non-believing family member has observed a blind spot in your parenting or a destructive pattern in your workaholism that you have been too spiritually proud to acknowledge.
Ouch, but that's so true.
Honoring God means having the humility of Moses, the willingness to say, I may know the theology of the burning bush, but you understand the mechanics of this desert better than I do. I will listen to you.
It requires completely dismantling our spiritual egos. Now, the second application is drawn from the story of Jael. The study calls it holy courage. Now, we talked earlier about how visceral and violent her story is. Jael drove a tent peg through a man's skull. I want to push on this again. How do we take a story of ancient physical warfare and assassination and apply it to our lives today without endorsing vigilantism or twisting the text.
It's an essential question, and we absolutely do not apply Jael's story by replicating her physical violence.
Right.
The New Testament gives us clear boundaries here. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians 6 that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Jesus himself rebuked Peter for using a sword in the garden. Therefore, we must gently and accurately translate the physical geopolitical warfare of Jael into the spiritual and moral courage required of believers today.
So what does that moral courage actually look like in practice for us?
It looks like a willingness to take costly, decisive, and uncompromising steps when God's honor, the integrity of the gospel, or the safety of the vulnerable is at stake.
Okay.
Think about Jael. She saw the violent enemy of God's people resting comfortably in her tent. She had a treaty with him. It would have been incredibly easy and politically advantageous to just let him sleep, to remain neutral, to play both sides, but she refused to compromise. She took radical, decisive action to eliminate the threat.
Having the courage to drive a tent peg into the heart of our own compromises, that is a powerful way to conceptualize it. It might mean having the holy courage to speak up against a corrupt or unethical practice at your workplace, knowing full well it might cost you a promotion or your job.
Yep.
It might mean standing absolutely firm on biblical truths when the culture around you is pushing back hard and demanding that you bow to a new ideology. It is about embodying the command of Joshua 1.9 to be strong and courageous, not because we wield physical weapons, but because we are armed with the truth of the gospel and the unrelenting conviction of the Holy Spirit. We must refuse to let the enemies of God find a comfortable resting place in the tent of our hearts.
Exactly. It is the courage of conviction in a culture of appeasement.
Now, the third application centers on the Rechabites, highlighting their disciplined faithfulness. The study connects their simple, austere lifestyle to our modern struggle against a culture of endless comfort and consumption.
A very necessary connection.
Right. And we establish that Christians aren't bound to a literal no houses, no wine rule, but we are called to sober-minded holiness. Romans 12 commands us not to conform to the pattern of this world. Let me suggest a practical analogy here.
Please do.
Just as the Rechabites used their literal tents and their abstinence from agriculture as a physical shield against the idolatry and corruption of settled Canaanite city life, modern believers might need to utilize chosen simplicity as a shield against being swallowed alive by modern cultural temptations.
Chosen simplicity. I like that.
I'm thinking of practical disciplines, like implementing a regular digital fast, completely turning off our phones for 24 hours on the weekend, or fiercely protecting an intentional Sabbath. These aren't requirements for salvation, but they are voluntary disciplines that keep us from being assimilated into the relentless consumerism of our age.
That is a profound and highly necessary analogy for the modern church. The Rechabites clearly recognized that if they settled into the comfort of the city, if they planted the vineyards and built the stone houses, they would eventually absorb the spiritual lethargy and the idolatry of the city.
It was inevitable.
Their lifestyle was an intentional physical barrier against assimilation. We live in a highly connected, hyper-consumerist world where our attention, our anxieties, and our affections are constantly being colonized by screens, by the 24-hour outrage cycle of the news, and by the relentless pursuit of more money and more comfort.
We are being discipled by our devices.
Precisely. So chosen simplicity, whether it is a digital fast, a radical commitment to financial generosity that lowers our standard of living, or strict, unbreakable boundaries around our family time, functions as our modern tent.
A modern tent.
It is a tangible way of reminding our own souls that we are pilgrims here. Our citizenship is in heaven. These disciplines keep our spiritual senses sharp. They keep our hearts untethered from a world system that is passing away. It is about practicing a disciplined faithfulness that looks at the culture and says, I absolutely refuse to let the comforts of this age sedate my hunger for the living God.
That is deeply challenging. It forces you to really audit your own lifestyle. Now, the next application drawn from the study focuses on the actions of King Saul and King David, and it explores the ethics of gratitude. This applies the historical kindness that the Kenites showed and how Israel responded centuries later. The study points out a profound truth. Gratitude is not just a polite social sentiment or a thank you card. Under God's gaze, gratitude is an act of justice. How should that reality shape the way believers live and interact?
It should make our gratitude incredibly tangible, active, and enduring. Look at the biblical models. Saul spared an entire people group from destruction because of a past kindness. David, out of the spoils of his own hard-fought victory, shared his wealth with the Kenite towns who had offered him friendship during his lowest moments of exile.
Right.
The Apostle Paul captures this ethic perfectly in Galatians 6:9, where he urges us, "Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers."
So it's about moving gratitude from an internal feeling to an external action.
Yes. Think about your own life. When someone walks with you through a dark valley, perhaps a friend who sat with you during a crushing season of grief, a mentor who guided your career when you were completely lost, or a church member who provided for you financially when you were broke, biblical gratitude demands vastly more than a polite acknowledgement.
It requires action.
It calls us to repay that kindness with tangible care, with radical generosity, and with fierce loyalty when they eventually find themselves in need. We are called to embody the long memory of God in our human relationships. We should be the kind of people who never, ever forget a kindness.
And the final overarching application that ties this entire study together is the call to love the nations. The Kenites teach us to love the global diversity of the church, to actively welcome all who seek God, while still honoring the distinct lines and boundaries God has drawn in Scripture. The Kenites were outsiders. They were nomads from Midian. Yet they found grace on the margins of Israel's camp. Today, that global, inclusive reach is fully realized in the gospel of Jesus Christ, who explicitly commands us to go and make disciples of all nations.
The Kenite story is a beautiful early whisper of the gospel's ultimate cosmic scope. It stands as a historical reminder that God's heart has always been bent outward, desiring to draw the nations to himself. Whenever a dusty tent on the edge of Israel's camp became a place where the Lord's purposes advanced, whether it was Jethro offering a sacrifice or Jael striking a blow for justice, it pointed forward to the glorious day described in Revelation.
The day when every nation gathers.
When the gates of the New Jerusalem will stand wide open and a great multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language will stand before the throne. The practical application for us is to be a radically welcoming people. We should be actively looking for the Jethros and the Jaels in our own communities.
The people on the margins.
The people outside are immediate, comfortable circles, people from different backgrounds or ethnicities, whom God is quietly drawing to himself by his magnificent grace.
What a beautiful vision of the church. As we begin to transition into the close of our deep dive today, I want to take a moment to look back at the immense ground we've covered. The study beautifully describes the Kenites as a mirror, and looking back, what a profound mirror they are.
They reflect so much.
We look at Jethro, the Midianite priest, and we see a clear reflection of the humility required to both give and receive wise counsel, regardless of the source. We look at Jael, a fierce, tent-dwelling woman, and we see a jarring but necessary reflection of the holy courage required to act decisively against evil and compromise.
Yes.
We look at the Rechabites, a steadfast nomadic family refusing the wine of the city, and we see a reflection of the quiet, disciplined obedience that honors God in an increasingly corrupt world. And above all of them, wrapping their entire history together, we see the reflection of a God who has a remarkably long, eternal memory for mercy.
It is a stunning portrait of the character of God. The Kenites are never at the center of the story, but their quiet footsteps through the desert perfectly mark the path of God's unfailing faithfulness.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. We spent time talking about how God remembered the kindness of the Kenites hundreds of years after it was given in the wilderness. Consider your own life today. Consider how a single act of faithfulness or kindness you do today, an act that might seem completely ordinary and entirely unnoticed, happening in the quiet wilderness of your everyday routine, might actually become a canopy of grace for your descendants generations from now.
Wow.
You have absolutely no idea how God might take your quiet obedience today, your hidden integrity at work, or your unseen generosity, and weave it into the deliverance of someone you will never even meet this side of eternity. Let the weight and the beauty of that thought anchor you in the significance of your daily decisions.
That is a beautiful, weighty truth to carry with us. Nothing done in faith is ever wasted. As we close our time together, I want to return, as the study does, to the closing scripture from the essay. It is the final promise given by God through the prophet Jeremiah to that steadfast family of nomads, the Rechabites, in Jeremiah chapter 35, verses 18 and 19. It reads, "You have obeyed the command of your forefather Jehonadab, and have followed all his instructions, and have done everything he ordered. Therefore, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Jehonadab, son of Rechab, will never fail to have a descendant to serve me."
That is the ultimate promise. Because they obeyed in the face of massive cultural pressure, they would always eternally have a place of service before the Lord.
Exactly. The main resonant encouragement here is that steadfast obedience in a compromising, loud world is seen, it is valued, and it is deeply cherished by God. The world around us may celebrate the wealthy, the powerful, and the prominent, but God consistently honors the quiet, unwavering resolve of those who simply fear Him and keep His word. And so, in light of this powerful scripture, I want to end our time by leaving you with a brief blessing. May the Lord grant you the quiet, unyielding resolve of the Kenites in your everyday life decisions. May you possess the humility of Jethro to seek and accept wisdom. May you have the holy courage of Jael to stand firmly against the darkness. May you walk with the disciplined faithfulness of the Rechabites, remaining unstained by the seductions of this world. And may you rest deeply, completely, in the assurance that our God never forgets a single act of love shown in His name. Grace and peace to you all.